Welcome back to Your Crisis Coach with Scott H. Silverman and me, Fred Carroll. And today we've got our friend Jay with us. How are you, Jay?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So Scott told me we're going to talk about some veteran affair things that are going on, and that you're the guy to talk to. So explain to people who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Jay, and I'm an alcoholic. Oh, wait a minute. Wrong meeting. I'm Jay, and I am a veteran in long-term recovery. I am the operations manager for Confidential Recovery, which is a substance use disorder treatment program, intensive outpatient treatment for veterans and first responders primarily. And also, we've started a nonprofit element called the Veterans Navigation Center, where we're trying to help veterans deal with some of their other life challenges. And I'm also a counselor myself, so doing a lot of peer support in addition to pushing paper and running the schedule.
So, Jay is so exclusive in his work. He can't go on camera yet. He's just too famous. We don't want to be overwhelmed with people who have needs. So, but I know your camera's not working, but we're glad you're here today. Jay works as my right hand at Confidential Recovery, and one of the things that we've learned over the years that both of us are in recovery is you can't go to a weekend seminar, and you can't go to a hotel for a couple of days, or go to a nice park and sit around a circle and sing Kumbaya, and everything gets better. It takes work, it takes time, and it takes a continuum of care. And what we've learned with serving people with substance use disorders is you really need to, and I should preface that 90% of the folks that we serve are veterans. So that's a real honor in its own right. So we learned that once they finish treatment, the substance use piece of it, dealing with the addiction component, all the underlying issues pop up and come up and need to be addressed. And we've created the nonprofit, the Veterans Navigation Center, with the idea that once the benefits are sunsetted and we the clinical side can't be provided because there aren't resources for it, we wanted to shift them over to the nonprofit. So things like life skills, and if they have other needs like housing or family reunification or other hiccups, that we can help keep them in the fold, if you will, and help them navigate next steps. And Jay's in charge of all that. So Jay, I'm going to just ask you a couple questions, if you don't mind, about where you feel that you're at right now with not only your own journey, but with helping others. As someone who's got the lived experience, what would you tell our viewers and our listeners that are the key points? Number one, that you've learned in your own success, and then number two, what you've brought to the table to help others.
Oh, that's a lot to unpack. No, but pretty good. I would say the biggest thing to keep in mind, particularly when talking with the veteran population, is that the military does a fantastic job of helping young men and women from the civilian world transition into the military. They assimilate people into the military very well. They break them down to parade rest, and then they put them back together in kind of this new format. Part of a team, mission-oriented, gives them a sense of purpose, identity, and helps them to focus on mission accomplishment and never, ever letting down the team and never failing at the mission. I don't need help. You need help. You can always depend on me. I'm not going to ever depend on anybody else. That's the takeaway. And then we call that the warrior ethos. And really, you need that to survive in combat and to excel in combat. And really, a lot of people don't think of it this way. In the military, survival is secondary. It's winning. That's what we're training people to do, is to win our nation's wars, right? There was a famous commander before the bombers left to bomb the German oil fields in Ploeste in World War II, and he said, coming back is secondary. That mentality is just dominant in everything the military does. In one moment, one instant, you suddenly are out of the military, whether you do 2 years or 40 years. In one instant, all that is gone. You no longer know what clothes to wear. You don't have a prescribed uniform of the day. You don't have a standard operating procedure. You're no longer part of that team. You are on your own. And it is up to you to figure that out. The military does not do a great job of transitioning people out of the military because it doesn't support their mission, right? Now, they've gotten better at it, but it's still not that great. And so now veterans are struggling to figure out this whole thing. And more than anything else, they've lost their sense of identity, their sense of purpose, because they're no longer fighting that battle. They no longer have that mission to accomplish. Now the mission is taking care of yourself and your family. And that's a really difficult transition. And a lot of veterans are experiencing issues with self-medicating, substance abuse, because that's something that the military found acceptable. They say they don't, but actions speak louder than words sometimes. And, a lot of people in the military are abusing substances to deal with the stress of the mission, the stress of that lifestyle. And certainly once they've learned that behavior, they're still continuing to do it when they get out. Now, that's part of my story. So the second part of your question. So a big part of my story was using the substance to deal with the stress. And, I was a pretty high-ranking naval officer. In fact, I was the commanding officer of a guided missile destroyer. It was a very, very stressful job. And the only way I knew to turn off my fears and my perceived imperfections was to drink it away whenever I could. And, that is not a sustainable model, particularly when you're in command. And I wound up getting relieved of command, court-martialed, and asked to leave the Navy rather abruptly. So what I found in recovery is a new purpose, a new identity. And part of how we keep staying sober is by giving it away. And so now I do what I do to try and encourage that next generation of veterans to say it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to accept help. It's okay to be less than perfect. And you're home now. Mission accomplished. Now you can accept this new identity, but we can build it together. We can build this new you together in recovery.
Does any of your past still not haunt you, but does it come back to bite you in any way? Any problems that you had in the past?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, almost every day. It does haunt me somewhat because I regret, some of the mistakes I've made. I've made some peace with them, but they still pop up. And then, there are certainly consequences for, the world is not as friendly to people who've been court-martialed. Court-martial it literally is a federal offense. I used to joke, well, let's not make a federal case out of this. I'm like, oh crap, it is a federal case.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely consequences. And a lot of veterans today are leaving the military with negative discharges. And the thing you got to understand is the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is what governs military members, many of the things that are in there are not illegal for average citizens. It's legal to smoke marijuana in the state of California. You smoke marijuana in the military, you're going to get an other than honorable discharge. Immediately, you'll be out of the military within 6 months if you pop positive. And that's something you have to explain to a future employer. So yeah, it's definitely, it leaves a mark when you leave the military in a bad way. And that's the big part of why a confidential recovery at Veterans Navigation Center, we don't discriminate based on the nature of your discharge. In fact, we kind of prefer the folks who've had a bad discharge because we know they need a little bit more help. I knew a guy who was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps. This guy was a trained scout sniper. He was on his first enlistment. He'd been to Iraq a couple of times, multiple kills, lots of awards, and he got into a drunk sex situation. He said, she said, wound up getting convicted of sexual assault, was going to get out, sent to the brig and punched out of the military. And this guy was going to lose everything, his veteran rights, GI Bill, everything. He was going to lose it all. And he's going to be, a registered sex offender and have a felony on his record. There has got to be a path back into normal society for that guy. Because if not, you really want to meet that guy in a dark alley? I mean, that's the kind of guy that's a headline waiting to happen. Mm-hmm. You've got to be able to intervene before those headlines happen.
Yeah.
So Jane, let me ask you, what percentage of people that enter the military actually stay in the military? permanently, like as a, a life career?
It's a pyramid. And so I would say that just with law of averages, you're looking at, between, I'd say about 30% to 50%, but it's more like in the high 30s, because as people progress, there's fewer positions at the top, right? You only have one chief of naval operations. You've got, I don't know what the numbers anymore, 5,000, 10,000 young ensigns coming in. There's a natural progression where people are going to have to, kind of fall off the turnip truck. So I think what we're trying to retain is somewhere around 35 to 40%. I don't know what our retention numbers are now, but they're not great.
So the next question is, why do you think the military, from your experience, doesn't do a better job to help people transition from their term, or their span of time in the military, to make it easier for them to kind of get back into the community?
Well, the why is because they're mission focused. And once someone is no longer part of mission accomplishment, they fall off the radar. And that it could be you broke your leg, you got pregnant, you got a mental disorder. But if you're no longer combat effective, you kind of go off into this other path, and they would love for you to get better and come back. But if not, then, they wish you the very best. So that's the harsh reality of it. And the other part of it is simply bandwidth, right? As I'm trying to use every resource I possibly can to keep my fighting force, honed to that razor's edge of sharpness, so it's ready to go at a moment's notice, and we're ready to fight right now. And just maintaining that op tempo makes it so hard for anything else to distract from that. And I think that's a big part of why anything that's not on that main path is kind of a secondary consideration for most military commanders.
Okay. So next question, when you were transitioning out, was there anybody there for you? You were on your own. I think what I'm hearing is when you leave the military, in the best of circumstances, there's really no resources. You're kind of on a self-propelled program. And if you don't have life skills outside of the military, like a lot of young people that I guess go in their late teens and leave in their early 20s, they're kind of left to their own device. But before you answer that, I want to back up and say, you shared how you were doing things to kind of deal with the feelings you were having. What percentage would you say of active military are self-medicating or potentially, because obviously the rules and regulations are pretty strict, but are there a lot of people out there that are dealing with similar inability to process feelings? And I'm assuming they have, therapists and mental health providers available, but, like with first responders, you make a phone call and you go see the head bender, it could be a career killer. So what's been your experience in your time of people that are suffering, maybe suffering without any kind of help or hope, but are suffering, and of those that are, is it different, you think, in the military than the real world, now that you've been in recovery, that were people that were kind of doing that dance with, whether it be alcohol, which is legal, or other things like prescription medication, which they're entitled to if they go to the doctor and there's an issue, and I don't know how it's monitored, how that works.
I think the numbers who are using alcohol or prescription medications is very high. I remember one of the first things I noticed when I got out of the military and was in the civilian world, civilian workplace, is that I didn't hear people talk about drinking as much as I remembered in the military. I mean, it seemed to be something that people talked about all the time. And I can't remember, it was a very small percentage of people I knew in the military who didn't drink. And they were really looked at as, what's this unicorn? Who's this guy? Why would he not drink? And so, and from a cultural standpoint, drinking heavily was considered very acceptable. In fact, a rite of passage, depending on the community you were in, military community you were in. I would also say, I think there's been a lot of effort to change that on the military's part. In the past, there was a lot of effort to cover up alcohol-related incidents. I think that's less prevalent now. I think it's harder to do now, unfortunately. I think there are a lot more people who are getting in trouble because of substance abuse, particularly alcohol. But the amount of people who are doing it is significant. Now, I also think there are a significant amount of people who are, there has been a focus change on therapy, and there is much, much more of a push to get help, mental help. And frankly, it's overwhelmed the system. The military health system is now, I mean, there's a huge backlog of people who are asking for help. Yes, that fear is there. And yes, asking for help can still have career consequences. But even despite that, there are people still, the number of people who are asking for help is very high. And it's actually overwhelmed the military system. They can't help the number of people who are asking for it. They've got waiting lists. The military,
most of the time, the people that they're asking for help for is from the Veterans Administration itself, correct?
well, active duty. I'm talking specifically active duty.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
they're definitely asking military medicine, and military medicines, and their answer in the past has been prescribing stuff. Here, take these meds for your depression so you can go back and fight. Again, I think there's some transition away from that. The other part of your question, you're asking, kind of who was there for me when I transitioned. There is a transition process. There's something called the Transition Assistance Program, like TAP, and there are people who come in and do presentations. It's a 2 or 3 day symposium, if you will, class. And there are people who come in and present from the VA, from different agencies, and you can get their card, but it's just drinking from a fire hose. You don't necessarily have these resources that you're going to remember because you're just getting pummeled with information, death by PowerPoint and all this stuff. I did collect quite a few business cards, but the other thing that I did was I tried to reach out to my veteran network. I tried to reach out to other people I knew were veterans, and I would say, hey, how did you do it? And that was not necessarily easy. That took some time. And I was lucky in that I had some veterans I knew, and I had entered the recovery community. So I was connecting with people in the recovery community who were veterans. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a 20-year-old, well, I guess let me do the math a little bit better here. Let's say 24-year-old Marine going back to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, still particularly if they're still active in their addiction and they're not in recovery, trying to connect with that local community and say, how do you do it? That seems overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
What do they do with, like when you're discharged dishonorably or for any other reason that's not a positive, do you lose benefits? Are there benefits taken away from you?
It all depends. So one thing that people don't understand a lot of times is you say the military TM. Well, the military, it's got a lot of parts to it. The two biggest pieces are you have the Department of Defense, which is, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, sometimes Coast Guard. That group, that's active duty and reserves. And they have the mission, and they like people to be staying in the military and accomplishing the mission. But then on the other hand, you've got the Department of Veteran Affairs, two completely different departments, two completely different cabinet secretaries, two completely different budgets. And the Veteran Affairs folks, the VA, they have a different mission. They want to take care of people who have served their country. So for Department of Defense, kind of specifically to your question, I got screwed up and I made a mistake, and I had an alcohol-related incident. I got punished by the military. The military is like, okay, this guy can't promote anymore. We have to make an example of them. We're going to boot him out and wash our hands of them. And they're kicking you out the door. They're making it hurt as much as they can because they're making an example of this behavior, saying, hey, rest of the military, don't do this, or this is what's going to happen to you. And then you're out the door, and they don't care about you anymore. They don't even know your name. You're past an opening as far as they're concerned. Then you land in the VA's lap and you say to them, hey, I'm a piece of crap. The military just kicked me out. They said I'm not going to get any benefits. And sometimes people won't even go to the VA because they've been told you're not going to get anything. The VA looks at your record and says, hey, actually, you did X number of years of honorable service. We're going to try and give you your benefits for those years of service, because what happened to you probably didn't just happen. There were probably some circumstances that led up to it. And that was my experience. Was, I went to a veteran service organization first, and they looked at it and they're like, Jay, you did 20 years of heroic stuff. You've got these wonderful, medals and fitness reports and awards, and then something happened. That probably was building over that 20 years. You deserve to, the benefits that you're entitled to for the 20 good years. And then the last couple of years, well, we can't help you there, but that's, you should be able to get what you get. So the VA makes a determination. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, but they look for reasons to try and give you the benefits that you've earned. I think.
Well, I guess that's a positive. Then it takes someone like you guys to get those other people who, because I think that's how I would think. If I was kicked out of something, I would think I've lost it all. So why even try? I'm not going to the VA because they told me I couldn't.
Right. And I think, the way we learned this lesson really was the Vietnam vets. So many Vietnam vets, fought in this really difficult war and, decided that to cope with it, they're going to use drugs. And then the military is like, oh my God, you use drugs. How dare you? You're in Vietnam. Why would you ever use drugs? And, kick them out, and they weren't getting their VA benefits. So we had this whole generation of veterans who, was in this terrible situation because of the circumstances that they served. And I think the VA has tried to really make amends for that and correct it and say, hey, wait a minute, you've got a Silver Star and a Purple Heart and all these other medals from Vietnam. And then, at the end of the war, you smoked a little dope and got kicked out. Well, you should still get, credit for that Silver Star and that Purple Heart. So, I think that has been a real mind shift in the veterans community, and a positive one, a very positive one.
So it's pretty safe to say that most people that transition out don't do it on a negative plane. It's more on a positive plane. But what I've seen in the folks that we serve, that there's still that barrier because, you're young, you go through the service. Usually that you'd think that time in the service is going to be a transferable commodity to get into the mainstream when you get home. But if you've got some of those underlying issues, trauma, distance away from significant others or family, and you're told what to do, and like you said, you're told how to dress, when to eat, what keep yourself alive with your cohort, and then all of a sudden you're out of the military and you're trying to find jobs. And now's a good time, obviously, to look for work, but over the last 20 years we haven't had a robust period of time like we see now. And because job opportunities, I think, are just all over the place. A lot of things going on, COVID, things changed. But I would think that, because I would assume that the majority of the clients that we serve may or may not have a negative background, but they're still dealing with those struggles. And when you can't get answers to questions, or if you're suffering from any mental health issues or untreated trauma, you need help. And, part of the reason, I don't know, Fred, we've shared this with you, but, half the veterans in San Diego, half of 375,000 men and women, they don't even have benefits, and they're eligible. So the big reason that, I didn't want to start another nonprofit, and Jay and I both decided together that, how do we invest in people that have invested in themselves and not give them that continuum of care and let them, go back to what they used to do because nobody was able to help hold their hand or support them or mentor them or be a big brother or a big sister during that transition time. Because it takes, if you're suffering from something, whatever it is, and I just read an article yesterday, one of the biggest problems that exist today in our country is loneliness. And they're putting loneliness above alcohol and even drug consumption. And loneliness could be a driver for all of that. So we're at very interesting times, and I think we're onto something. I believe we're onto something. And Jay, would you share a little bit of some of the feedback that you've gotten from some folks who have graduated, the substance use disorder program, and they've gotten into recovery, and now they're training to give back. Would you share a little bit about the VNC, the Veterans Navigation Center, and how that's working and why we think it's important?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the vast majority of folks coming out of the military, vast majority might be a little too strong a term, but I think many do have an honorable discharge and, have a lot of potential career options. Now, there is a statistic that says something like 68 to 80% of the people coming out of the military don't necessarily want to do what they did in the military, right? So maybe if I was in the military and I was a electronics technician, maybe I don't want to do that anymore. Maybe I want to, change my career and be a, I don't know, school teacher, whatever. And how do I do that? There is a lot of confusion, and a lot of folks are self-medicating to deal with the various traumas they experienced in the military and even before. So as we've been running our substance use disorder program, we've encountered a really wide variety of veterans. Some folks who are career veterans, some folks who are in for a short period of time, but they all ran into some kind of a life crisis. And they found themselves in the addiction spiral, right? They were self-medicating, they were using substances, and they were just starting to have really negative consequences. And some of them were even more negative than you can imagine. We had one particular veteran. He'd been homeless for many years. He got a job driving for a drug dealer. And when they went to go pick up the drugs, they got caught in one of the largest DEA stings in the country, 150 arrests. And this guy got sentenced, got convicted. And he came to us awaiting sentencing. And so this guy, he'd done 8 years in the Marine Corps, and he said that was the best time of his life because that was the only time he was cleaned up. The rest of his life, he'd been using and the last few years had been pretty much homeless. And that guy, when he first came to us, he said, I don't know if I can stay here, Jay. My drug of choice was meth, and the people who are here, their drug of choice is alcohol. And I said, well, why don't you give it a couple of sessions and see if you hear the similarities instead of the differences? He said, okay, I'll give it a try. Came back and said, Jay, I love it here. I want to stay. I really like these other veterans. And he said, I have another problem, though. I said, oh, yeah, what's that? And he says, well, part of the stipulations of my pretrial release are that, I can drink alcohol in moderation, and your program suggests abstinence. I don't feel right drinking when other people are trying to get sober. And I said, okay, why don't you try not drinking this weekend, and let's see how that goes. So he goes home, comes back on Monday. I said, how'd that go? And he says, that sucked. I freaking hated that. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe there's something there. And that guy has now been 2 years sober. When he went to his sentencing, he got house arrest instead of going to the pen because of the time he'd spent with us. And now he's eager to give back to the next generation of veterans. Other folks came to us and just kept relapsing, couldn't figure out why. We bring a lot of different treatment modalities, and we actually connected a veteran with a aquatic therapy group. And as soon as he came back from his first session, he says, Jay, connect me with the VA. I'm ready to talk about my trauma, which was really what was driving the whole thing. So as these folks have discovered what's going on, what we've created is this small community of veterans in recovery. And it's not the counselors that are doing it. They're doing it for each other. These guys, because they have this fellowship, they want to see each other every week, and they want to stay connected. They want to stay sober. And now they want to pass it on to the next generation of veterans. And what we're finding, and this is kind of to Scott's point, is it's so overwhelming out there in terms of veteran benefits. I mean, veterans are drowning in a sea of goodwill. They don't know what's available to them. They don't know how to access it. They don't know what it is, what it means. And there are some predatory organizations out there that are preying on veterans in order to take advantage of their GI Bill, or, for-profit universities, that type of thing. And these guys have learned how to navigate the veteran community because it's basically a series of urban legends. I mean, you try and find out about a program, and you Google, and you go here, and you call here, and you do that, and you just keep bumping your head against the wall, and then you just mention it to another veteran. They're like, oh, you got to call Veteran Organization X about that. That's how you do that. Well, that's what these guys want to do, is they want to compile all these urban legends into one place. And then when a veteran says, I have a problem with X, we're able to just flip to the Rolodex and say, oh, here's program X. And but the other thing I think we want to do is say, hey, you've asked me to help you with a discharge upgrade. Let's talk about maybe why you got that negative discharge. Oh, I was doing meth. Oh, okay. Let's maybe we should talk about that for a little bit, because our experience has been that if you don't address the meth thing, you're going to continue to have negative discharges. That's just kind of the way it goes. And so by doing that holistic approach and trying to get to know the whole veteran and not just one problem at a time, we think we can help them to heal. And really the last thing I think that makes this a kind of a unique program is it's that veteran to veteran connection. Once you've connected with the veteran and suggested some resources, it's that follow-up. Because now that what we call the veteran peer navigator, that veteran with lived experience, is now connected with the young veteran who's been calling in. And we can say, hey, did you call that person to connect you with resources that we suggested? And if they say no, well, then we say, well, why not? And they say, well, I was scared. And we say, that's okay. It's okay to be scared. Why don't you come in the office? We'll call them together. You've got to dial the numbers. Very important you participate in your own recovery, but I'm going to be sitting here right next to you. And if you hear anything you don't want to hear, I'm going to be right here to catch you. You're not alone. I can tell you from my experience, I had been told I wasn't going to get anything from the VA. And the first time I went to the VA, I went to their parking lot, and I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes, and then I drove home because I was scared. And then, I prayed and meditated a little bit, talked to my sponsor, went back there the next week, went to a veteran service organization, and they're like, Jay, you got nothing to be afraid of. We see guys like you every day.
Yeah, unfortunately, the world we live in, even now, the fear of scams even comes down to Scott and I doing a show about mental health and addiction recovery and awareness. There are ones out there that don't have, they advertise as having interest in that, but they're there for profit more than, anything else. They're trying to take advantage of an opportunity rather than solve the problem. And trust, part of the reason why Scott and I discuss why we don't send people someplace, it would be nice that we could say, hey, go to this recovery place, this recovery. But as Scott has told me, there are some out there that aren't any good. And how do you vet which ones are good and which ones aren't? And then it creates non-trust. We don't want to be responsible for sending you to the wrong place. That's right. Just taking your money and then putting you back on the street. So,
and it's tough because you got, Scott and I've talked about this too. The whole concept of even advertising. It's so difficult. Any organization has to have a funding stream, or you can't keep the lights on. You got to pay your counselors. You got to pay the utilities. We like to have a few extra bucks so we can buy pizza for sessions. Because we're not above bribery. We want people to come and participate in their own recovery, and I'm certainly willing to spring for a few pizzas, right? So you got to keep the lights on, but at the same time, the focus is in the individual getting better. And sometimes when you advertise, it makes you seem like you're chasing the dollar, when the reality is you're chasing the person that you want to help. And it's a very difficult balance, that's for sure.
Well, does any of this get mentioned, since we're in a political world? Does this matter to the votes? Do either of these guys, no matter who you're voting for presidentially, does any of these topics ever come up?
I think if I had to say, I would say veteran issues are the last bipartisan issue in the United States. It is really hard for a politician to stand up and say, I don't like veterans. That's probably not going to win a lot of votes. And, every congressperson that we speak with, regardless of their political affiliation, is like, oh my gosh, veteran affairs. Oh yeah, we want to do whatever we can to support vets. So it's really, really good in that regard. Now, the negative part is, unfortunately, there's politics and there's government. And the thing about government is, there is something to be said about, God, I hate this phrase, but the deep state. It's large bureaucracies, right? Large bureaucracies exist to support large bureaucracies. And so it is difficult to affect positive change. It is difficult to get bureaucrats to make decisions and to fund things that they haven't funded in the past. There's fear of change. So I think from an intellectual level and from an emotional level, there's definitely government folks and politicians who 100% support what we want to do in theory, but whether or not they're willing to fund it or put their name behind it, that tends to be a little bit more difficult. But I think it's just the nature of large bureaucratic organizations.
Yeah, it's the world. So before we finish here, Scott, you got anything in final words?
No, I'm excited for the journey that we're on to work with veterans. And, I think that the better we get at listening to people and helping, meeting them where they're at, the more effective we can be in what we do. I mean, there's 50 plus members in the Veteran Coalition here in San Diego, and we're working very closely with all of them with the idea that, we have a certain niche, substance use treatment, and working on transitioning people. But there are a lot of organizations that handle all the other things that we don't. So building that collaboration and that funnel to help support and getting, those veterans who aren't on insurance engaged, and if many of them think the way, and have the experience Jay has had with the VA, we know we can help open doors, and we have a great relationship with the VA, and we couldn't be serving the veterans the way we do without that relationship. So, and I think life's all about relationships. So the fact that we're talking about it and keep exposing it, and, Fred using this platform to, get the message out, and maybe one day we'll get a camera for Jay that works so we can actually see him. And I know he'll tell me that's on my budget side, so we'll remedy that.
Send away.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. But
good. Great job, Jay. Thanks.
So how long have you guys been friends?
I'd say it's probably close to 12 years. I actually came to see Scott when I got in trouble. He was running an organization to help people get back into the mainstream of life after being incarcerated. And I came to him and said, I think I'm in a little bit of trouble. Can you help me? He says, well, why don't you try and get out of trouble first? And I said, okay, I'll try that. It didn't work out. Then I came back to him a couple years later and said, okay, I've been through the trouble part. Now I need to do something to give back. And I think that's it was meant to be.
Did you believe in it, Scott? Did you truly, honestly look at him and think he'd be where he is today?
Knowing what he called it a little bit of trouble, it's like people who have a little bit of a drinking problem. I knew he had some serious times he had to go through, and that when we reconnected and we sat down and talked, there was no doubt there was no ceiling on what we could do. Have I been impressed with his progress and growth? Absolutely. He runs pretty much the whole operation now, and I know I can, trust him like a family member that I still talk to, and he does a great job. And with his background, when new customers of ours meet him, he has something I don't. I'm not a veteran, so there's an immediate connection there of connectivity that they can bond with, and I probably could do the same kind of thing, but it would be different because he's been there and he's done that. And I think that's such a way for someone to trust someone quicker, because somebody who comes to us, it's usually because they're in trouble or they have a need or they've bumped it around the system for a long time and they don't trust easy. And so having, Jay in the saddle and, piloting the plane, I don't mind being the passenger or even sitting in the back or part of the ground crew. So our relationships really worked out well.
Well, it's interesting. That's a good positive way to end because we were talking about all this non-trust of people having, but yet this is an example of you, because I'm assuming that when you met Jay, he would be somebody you would not let into your house willingly immediately, but today you'd probably give him the keys.
Right.
And
Well,
it's
when I first met him, he came in uniform, and I
right.
remember people at the front said to me, "Hey, Scott, somebody's here. I think it might be the Popo. I'm not sure, but he's in this uniform, and what do you want me to do with him?" I said, "Well, send him back." And I didn't realize, it was going to be somebody who was, in the Navy. I thought maybe it was a parole officer or somebody undercover, DA uniform or DEA uniform. So,
but it is an example that it works, that the system can work if both people, you, the teacher, and him, the student at that point, were willing to work together, that you can become where Jay is today. So that's something to be proud of on both your ends.
Yeah.
And something to look forward to in the future with the next guy that walks in like Jay did. And you now have a something to build off of. You trust it.
And what's even more enriching for me is there are days that I'm the teacher and he's the student. And there's days that I'm the student and he's the teacher. So we have that kind of relationship, which allows, I think, for expansion of ideas and looking at what we have in front of us and how do we improve on this? What do we need to do to make it better? And again, he's on the front line, so he's hearing it in a different way than I am, but I have a lot of experience with opening doors. And, how many times do you hear him use the word navigator? You were just talking about that earlier today. We like the word navigator.
Love that navigator. I'm surprised you don't drive one. But okay, so that's going to be it for your crisis coach. I want to thank Jay for joining us. Thank you, Jay. Anything you want to say, Jay, before you leave?
No, I would just say, I think the veteran community is a special population, and it needs special handling in order to help the people who are there. And I think if we can convince our political leaders, state, local, and federal, to let veterans help other veterans, I think it works better for everybody. The veteran will have a better outcome, and then we're able to use the resources that are allocated for veterans, which are lots and lots of money, and that frees up resources to help non-veterans through non-veteran funds. So it's a win-win. And really all we're trying to do is connect with other providers in the community and to convince them that that's a good strategy.
Well, it sounds like a viable option to me. So, okay, so that's going to be it, Scott. That's it. You did a good job today. I'm going to give you a gold star, and you should be able to relax now and smoke a nice cigar and enjoy yourself. Because
you know where I'm going now. I got to go change clothes and get ready.
Yeah, well, it's 7:00 where I am. The sun's going down and it's cold still. So 57 degrees. Oof. But okay, everybody. So this is your crisis coach. I'm Fred Carroll. That's Scott H. Silverman. And our guest today was Jay WYLIE. And that's going to be it. So if nobody has told you they love you today, we love you. And we will see you again next week. Thank you very much. See you later.
Thanks, Fred.